He starred as Little Joe and in Little House on the Prairie, but there was nothing small about Michael Landon's talent and ambition. He created programs about ideal families while promoting himself as a perfect father and husband. In fact, the reality didn't quite match the image. Landon was raised in a family perfect only in misery. He was a boy caught between two feuding parents and two religions. But Michael grew into a gifted actor and writer, often creating stories that centered on the unconditional love he sought. He touched a chord with television audiences and spent 3 decades as an admired symbol of family values. Landon once said that if you can give the audience a good cry, they'll keep coming back. He did, and they did too.
Gee, I was a skinny kid, wasn't I?
We have welcomed Michael Landon into our home so many times over the years that by now we feel we know him. But of course, we've only just glimpsed the outline of the man.
He's a kind of a critter that doesn't really exist anymore. He took responsibility for his show.
He had the most infectious and just a silly, almost boyish kind of giggle.
He was a big kid, yeah.
He lived a life of love and laughter with a generous dose of the kind of emotional complications that come from having 3 marriages. The drive that turned him into a television icon is the stuff of motivational textbooks.
I still am amazed by the number of people that I meet who will talk about sitting down in front of a Little House episode and crying.
He has continued to face this battle with humor and honesty and a personal sense of dignity that characterizes the man. Would you welcome Michael Landon?
A critic once noted that everything Michael Landon touched turned to apple pie. But in reality, his life was not completely above reproach, and the first person to tell you that would be Michael Landon.
I'm far from being a saint or a squeaky clean kind of a guy. I'm really just your average family man. The only difference is I'm on TV a lot. But aside from that, I'm like anybody else here. Except for when I walk on water. Just a nasty habit.
Michael Landon began his life as Eugene Maurice Horowitz, born October 31st, 1936 in Forest Hills, New York. His sister Evelyn was already 3.5 years old. The children had show business in their blood. Peggy O'Neill was an outgoing young beauty who found an outlet for her flamboyant personality dancing in a Broadway chorus line. Peggy met a studio executive named Eli Horowitz, in charge of East Coast publicity for RKO Pictures. Though Peggy was from an Irish Catholic family and Eli was a Jew, the couple married anyway. They grew to hate each other and turned Landon's childhood into a holy war.
His childhood was a difficult one. He had parents who fought constantly, and when they didn't fight, they didn't speak. They didn't speak for months.
6, 7 weeks would go by, you know. One sitting here, I'm sitting here, mother's there, and tell your father dinner's ready, you know. Dinner's ready.
By the early 1940s, Eli's once promising career at RKO Pictures had stalled. With a family of 4 to feed, Eli had to be practical. He swallowed his pride and took a job managing a string of movie theaters in New Jersey. The Horowitz family moved to a brand new home in the blue-collar community of Collingswood, New Jersey. Eli started spending long hours at the movie theater, which meant he wasn't around to protect the children from their mother's increasingly erratic behavior.
I know that they were hit a lot from my grandmother. She would go off on these rages, and she would grab Michael by his ears and swing him around, and she would say, "Let's dance around the room." You know,
Peggy Horowitz was prone to depression and half-hearted suicide attempts. She seemed to take out most of her personal frustrations on the children.
And one of the saddest things Dad told me was when he was just a little boy, I believe he had turned 6, and his mother said, "You know, I don't like little boys. You're not cute anymore."
He once told me he used to run out of the house. He had a hiding place, and he used to pretend to be other people. And he used to play different roles and just take on a whole different life by pretending.
The future star began dreaming about a perfect family in order to escape his own family's more depressing reality. He later blamed himself for talking his parents into staying together.
My mother and father just flat out didn't like each other. And it was partially my fault that they ever stayed together. I was always the one to beg, please don't leave. Well, unfortunately, they were listening to a 7-year-old.
Eugene wet his bed until he was a teenager, and his angry mother tried to humiliate him into stopping by hanging the soiled sheets outside his bedroom window. Even so, he never confided to friends about his miserable home life.
In those days, if we had problems, we pretty much kept them to ourselves. It's not like today where everybody knows everybody's business, you know, and those days kids didn't say much about what was going on in their homes.
At Collingswood High in the early 50s, Eugene Orowitz was just another scrawny teenager with a funny-sounding nickname.
Well, I knew him as Oogie Orowitz. Oogie was what we called him. It was Eugene, but we all called him Oogie.
He felt tormented at home, but Oogie put up a funny facade in public.
We had a teacher, Mrs. Snoke, who was the type of teacher you didn't say boo and everybody was scared to death, but all of a sudden after 5 minutes she'd say, Eugene, did you do your homework from last night? And he would laugh and say no. And she would lose control of the class, and that upset her greatly.
I remember he used to sit next to me in Spanish class and rarely got very good scores, but somehow or other always passed the course. I think the teachers just loved him because he had so much charm and such a lovable way about him.
Oogie Orowitz was turning out to be a likable underachiever. He was too small to play football or basketball, but he was fast enough to make the track team. That's when he discovered the javelin.
He was 135 pounds soaking wet, about 5'7", 5'8", but he just had a real live arm and a lot of whip in his arm, where fellas much bigger than him just didn't have that whip.
For the first time, Oogie had found something he was really good at, and he finally buckled down. He practiced the javelin 6 days a week.
He would take his javelin home with him or walk to school with it, and I mean, I'd seen him more than once. He'd take the javelin, walk to school, and just throw it, walk up, pick it up, just like you would a golf ball. Throw it and go pick it up and get the golf ball.
He would throw the javelin 200 feet, and then my little 115-pound body would get the javelin, run back 100 feet with it, and then throw it the other 100 feet so he could keep practicing.
And he just worked and worked and worked so hard. I mean, it was amazing to see this little scrawny, skinny kid just build himself up tremendously. And I remember seeing him doing one-arm push-ups with his left arm because he was lefty. And he just became tremendously strong.
Somewhere around this time, the teenage Landon saw the 1949 movie Samson and Delilah with Victor Mature and Hedy Lamarr.
Samson killed a lion with his bare hands.
The once scrawny, now strong teenage boy was overwhelmed by the larger-than-life image he saw on the screen.
Samson, this is the mark of your power. It's your hair.
In his own mind, the teenager identified with the long-haired hero Samson. Landon's own hair had always been dark, thick, and curly. Now, he started to believe that his hair might actually be a source of superhuman strength.
I've taken away your strength, Samson.
That fantasy was custom-made for a teenage misfit trying to comprehend his newfound ability. Not surprisingly, Oogie never told the guys about his harebrained theory. He just kept showing off.
He had a white picket fence around his house. And he took his javelin and threw his javelin and knocked every one of those pickets off the fence. He would just stand up on the lawn and throw the javelin and knock a picket out and then pick it up and knock another picket out. So then he said, okay, now go get the hammers. We got to put it all up before my father comes home, before he gets all upset about it.
Eli spent most of his time at work. When he was at home, his unhappy marriage made him distant and remote. Eugene began looking around for substitute father figures. Friends say he became close to their high school janitor, whom he often went to for advice. He dated occasionally, but never seemed to take high school life that seriously.
Our senior year, he was running for a class office, and he was giving his speech. And I remember he said, friends, Romans, countrymen, lend me your homework.
Scholastically, Oogie Orowitz was in fierce competition for last place. He finished 199th out of a class of 201. The only saving grace was that he won first place in javelin at the state championship, which earned him an athletic scholarship to USC. Even his own friends never expected Oogie to amount to much.
When Michael was in high school, he was never dedicated to anything but throwing the javelin. So then to see him on these TV shows, you could never imagine that he had that inside him, because all through high school, he never showed any of that talent.
Landon discovered that talent only by accident, and only because he had hardened himself enough to find victory in the jaws of defeat. In the fall of 1954, 17-year-old Michael Landon, still known by his real name, Eugene Orowitz, moved to California with dreams of Olympic glory.
When I came to California, I was on a scholarship to at USC for throwing the javelin, and I figured I'd throw the javelin in college 4 years, and then I'd go in the service, and hopefully I'd get in the Olympics, and then I'd decide after 8 years what I was going to do.
All of that changed when a torn shoulder ligament ended his javelin career. His dreams shattered, Eugene left college within the year. He took various blue-collar jobs, but money was so tight he could barely eat.
I was process serving at the time and selling blankets door to door. I used to cry and tell them that my father had had a heart attack and was losing the store, and I had to try to dispose of these blankets to pay his hospital bills. And women would generally want to give me a cup of tea and ask me to sit down and take it easy.
Landon had always craved the closeness of family. Through a friend, he met and married a legal secretary named Dodie Frazier. Dodie was 7 years older than her husband and had a 6-year-old son named Mark, whom Landon adopted.
He had like a skinny, lean, but heroic way about him. You know, dark curly hair. And I said, hey, what's your name? And he goes, Gene. I said, well, I'm Mark. And we just hit it off.
A few years later, the family adopted a second son named Josh. Michael told the children the fishiest stories he could imagine.
I used to wear big blue sweatshirts under my regular shirt. My oldest son was convinced I was Superman, because I let him get a pop look at that one day. And I told him, now look, I want you to know something. It's between you and I. I am Clark Kent. I'm Superman. He was 7 years old. What? I said, if you tell anybody, I can't fight crime. Well, of course, he went out and told every kid in the neighborhood. And let me give you the topper. I went upstairs, and my kid's down in the den looking at a book. And I went to hook the screen, and I leaned forward and fell out the window, right? In my jockey shorts. I fell out the window and landed on the patio. But I went by the window he was sitting at. And I got up. I mean, as luck would have it, I was a little sore, but I wasn't hurt. And I walked back I opened the door, walked back in the house, and he's standing in the hall like that. He said, what did you just do? I said, I flew down to see if the paper was here, and I went upstairs. When he was 22 years old, I finally had to tell him the truth.
Throughout his own unhappy childhood, Landon managed to put up a brave front. Now that hard-earned inner strength was about to come in handy. After following a friend to a studio audition, he set his sights on acting, and he managed to tough it out through rounds of humiliating rejections.
It's telephone time.
Telephone Time, in 1956, was his first big break.
Little person. Little.
That is a child.
Child?
We were all little children once, like her.
Not Casper.
Yes.
By now, the young actor had already discarded his ethnic-sounding real name of Eugene Orowitz and invented something with more star power.
Everybody had an actor's name in the early 50s, you know. You had Rock and Lance and all these people, you know. There's Rock, there's Lance, and Eugene. No, it just didn't seem to work out for me.
His new last name came out of a phone book.
And so we said it a couple times, Michael Landon. Yeah. And it clicked.
The newly minted Michael Landon showed surprising diversity in his early roles.
You hear that? You hear that? A big party. Big party for the champ.
He got an early taste of the uncertainties of Hollywood when he made this pilot that never even aired.
It seems to me a day never went by when I was a kid that you weren't lecturing me on decency and integrity and morality.
And I'm happy to see that my lectures bore fruit.
In High School Confidential, he was typecast as a clean-cut athlete.
Hi, I'm Sting Bentley. Oh, that's too bad. I'm president of the Rangers.
And wound up in the trenches in a turn of fate.
I'm going to prove to you and through you to the entire crew that I'm not yellow.
In my book, you're still a murdering, yellow-gutted louse.
I never felt I was going to make it as an actor because to me actors were tall and handsome and great voices.
Michael Landon in a powerful performance as the boy possessed.
In 1957, the 19-year-old finally made an impact with the campy classic, I Was a Teenage Werewolf.
When I Was a Teenage Werewolf got released, he ran in my room and he said, man, take a look at this. And I read the headline, Girls Go Ape Over Werewolf.
His ears stuck out so much that producers had to tape them back, and Landon later had them professionally fixed.
Nothing you've ever seen.
The movie, which cost less than $90,000 to make, earned nearly $7 million and helped establish the market for teenage horror flicks. He went from being a werewolf to playing an albino in God's Little Acre, and then became a soldier in The Legend of Tom Dooley. Landon was not destined to become a movie star, but he was about to find a permanent home on television. In 1959, CBS's Gunsmoke was decimating the competition when NBC decided to put on its own Western.
There was some opposition initially from the headquarters of NBC to the casting because all four of the leads were relative unknowns.
The young Cartwrights didn't look like they could be remotely related to each other, but the Bonanza audience swallowed a far-fetched story that explained everything.
Now that's impossible.
Impossible, ma'am? I don't think you'd say that if you could have seen Horse's mother.
Isn't she your mother, too?
Who, that big gal? Oh, no.
Though the boys shared the same father, they had three different and three conveniently deceased mothers. Bonanza had plenty of shoot-'em-up scenes.
Shoot 'em, Tubble!
And it also brought a lighter touch to TV westerns.
Say half of these rabbits happen to be mine.
You ain't skinning these rabbits, Joe.
Oh, yes, I am.
No, you ain't skinning these rabbits. Not today, you ain't, Joseph.
You're making me mad.
I'd reconsider that, little brother.
Well, I'm telling you right now. I'm telling you, I'm gonna, one way or the other, Brother Horse, I'm gonna get into one of these cages. Look, come on now, let me out of here!
During the first season, Landon knew enough about television not to get his hopes up about Bonanza.
After we sang that theme song, I thought the sets would go dark all over the world.
I've got a flair for women everywhere. Bonanza! Bonanza! Aye, aye, aye! And when I call on any gal at all, she's gonna welcome
Too much
me.
noise. Can't sleep.
I'm not afraid of any pretty maid. Bonanza! Bonanza!
The lyrics were horrendous. And we didn't use it after. We used the music, but not the lyrics after the pilot.
Don't you turn away from me, Cartwright!
Behind the scenes, Bonanza was about to play an important role in the network's ingenious business plan. NBC's parent corporation, RCA, was trying to sell color television sets.
Color, the touchstone of reality.
I congratulate the RCA scientists, researchmen, and engineers.
My father made the decision ultimately that we should put this show on in color. Bonanza jump-started the sale of color television sets because as the show went up in the ratings, people had to see it in color.
Bonanza became a ratings juggernaut in its third season when it moved to Sunday nights. It was undoubtedly the most important show of its day and dominated the network schedule for the rest of its 14-year run.
It was one big party. I mean, here are three guys. I mean, Lauren was making a few bucks, but Dan and I, we didn't have a dime. And all of a sudden, we're going places for NBC. You can order as much food as you want.
And that was important.
Man, we used to have breakfast you wouldn't believe. I'll have the 3 dozen oysters and the 2 steaks to start. You know, they just keep going. Room service, we couldn't believe it. And they paid us.
Landon had originally celebrated his big new job on Bonanza by going out to eat, and friends noted that Landon measured his own success by the food he could put on the table.
We were ordering dinner, and Michael ordered a platter of crab legs. He ordered another large appetizer, and then he ordered a double filet mignon. Honestly, I thought it was for everybody. And he made it very clear when I said, well, I don't think we need any other appetizers. He said, well, I don't know what you need. You know, you guys order what you want. It wasn't that he was such an enormous eater. This was his way of substantiating the fact to himself that he had made it.
Little Joe and his big brother, Haas, quickly became the show's most popular characters.
Joe, anytime you get that look in your eye, I always get in trouble.
Little Joe, of course, was a heartthrob who romanced women from one end of the Ponderosa to the other.
I want you more than anything else in the world. I want you for the rest of my life. I love you more than anything else in the world.
Oh, sure I love you. I love you like a sister.
A sister?
Landon was shrewd enough to capitalize on his newfound popularity by making lucrative personal appearances all over the country. He also managed to spend countless charitable hours with sick and disabled youngsters. He knew how to give the audience what they wanted and often appeared in his familiar Bonanza costume. Back home, the young star's marriage was in trouble. In a futile attempt to keep the marriage together, the Landons adopted a third baby named Jason. In the meantime, Landon had met a glamorous young model at the studio named Lynn No, who would become his second wife. Michael and Dodie divorced in 1961, and Dodie was awarded custody of the children. But she decided to return her third son for readoption. Baby Jason never saw either Dodie or Michael again.
Josh had been with us for a while, Jason only a year. And Mom was going through this, you know, it hurts to be left, you know. She was feeling, you know, like, she couldn't concentrate on raising a kid. And Dad wasn't close enough to Jason at that point. You know, the bond hadn't happened. It wouldn't have made sense to keep him.
Michael Landon had made it to the big time, but he already wanted even more, and he knew just how to get it.